The question of whether you should buy or rent a home is probably the most heated debate in our community right now. You'll find fierce advocates for both sides on social media, at dinner tables, in the group chats. On one side, you've got people saying renting is dead money, that our community is already behind financially and we need home ownership to catch up. On the other side, you've got people who will remind you that the standard route to buying a home is just getting a mortgage, and that's haram for most Muslims. And the halal alternatives, they're more expensive, less available, and surrounded by competing fatwas that leave most people more confused than when they started. I've done both. I've rented and I've bought through a halal home finance product. And I can tell you the answer is not as obvious as either side makes it sound in today's market, because things are changing. So in this video, we're going to do two things. We've built a free calculator that cuts through the financial side of this debate. You put in your numbers and it tells you where you actually stand. But this isn't just a numbers game, it's also a question of the heart. The halal mortgage confusion, the competing fatwas, the community pressure. We're ambitiously going to try and solve all of that, so make sure that you stick around to the end and let us know if we succeeded. This is probably the most repeated line in the whole debate. The idea that every month you pay rent and you're throwing money away. But think about it for a second. When you go out for dinner, you're not throwing money away. You're paying for a meal, a service, an experience. Rent is kind of the same thing. You're paying for a roof over your head, a place to live, for someone else to deal with a boiler when it breaks. That's not just dead money, that's money that you've spent on something that you need. And renting saves you from significant upfront costs. No stamp duty, no legal fees, no maintenance bills landing out of nowhere. But what it really gives you is flexibility. If you need to move for work, you can. And if you decided you'd rather live in a different country, even just for a few years, it's much easier to do that whilst renting. With a house, especially one that's not paid off yet, you now need to figure out how to keep up with house payments whilst you're away. Do you rent it out when you're a landlord dealing with tenants from another country, hoping they look after a place that you care about? It adds a layer of complexity that renting simply doesn't have. But here's what the pro home buyers would say. At least with a mortgage, at the end of 30 years, you have a paid off home. And that is true, eventually. But it doesn't happen as quickly as people think. In the early years, the bulk of your monthly payments isn't building ownership. It's either going towards the interest, or in the case of Islamic mortgages, rental payments on the share of the home that you don't yet own. Either way, you're building equity much more slowly than most people realize. So renting isn't the straightforward financial mistake people make it out to be, and buying isn't the no-brainer that people assume it is. The truth is somewhere in between, and it depends entirely on your numbers. So let's talk about what buying a home actually costs, because most people making this decision compare just two numbers, their rent versus a mortgage payment. And that comparison is almost always wrong. We need to look at the total cost of each. With buying, the first cost is the deposit. In the UK, the average first-time buyer puts down somewhere between 15 and 20% of the purchase price. On a £300,000 home, that's £60,000 tied up before you've even moved in. Then there's stamp duty. Since April 2025, the thresholds dropped significantly. First-time buyers now pay on anything above £300,000 and existing home movers on anything above £125,000. This will easily add thousands to your upfront costs. That's not to mention legal fees, surveys, removal costs. Research shows that the average of all of those overlooked expenses come to around £5,800. And then there's maintenance. This is one that really catches people out. Check the Trade found that the UK homeowner spends on average £7,500 a year maintaining their home. And then there's perhaps the most underappreciated cost of all, opportunity cost. That £60,000 deposit could have been invested in assets that generate a return that outpaces the growth of your property value. And those assets would likely be far more liquid, meaning if you ever need to access that money, selling stocks or shares or gold is a lot simpler than listing a house, finding a buyer, and dealing with all of the palaver and the complexity that comes with that. Now compare that to renting. Your monthly rent and your utilities. That's largely it. Maybe the council tax. No stamp duty, no legal fees, no emergency repair fund, and your capital stays liquid. So renting versus buying isn't as simple as it's been made out to be. And the only way to know which makes sense for you is actually sit down and work it out, which is what we're going to do right now. We've built a free buy versus rent calculator that does this work for you. You put in your numbers and it works out for you your break-even point, the moment when buying actually starts to make more financial sense than renting. Right, so let me show you how this actually works in practice. So let's say we have 28-year-old Adam from Birmingham who works in finance, and because he's lived at home, he's managed to actually save up an amount of £60,000 as a deposit, and he's finally ready to fly the nest. Well done, Adam. He's managed to find a decent starter home in Birmingham for £300,000, but he's now wondering, should he actually be renting instead? He's got a 20% deposit, so he's looking at a rental rate of about 5.8% based on today's prices. And as you can see on this buy or rent calculator, we've entered in all of these numbers. We put the Islamic mortgage at about 5.8%, and the rent that he's going to be paying, 5% of the property price, is going to be roughly about 1,250. Now, when we look at the annual return, this is the key thing, because when you are comparing buying or renting, the key thing that is going to be making a massive difference is what are you going to do with that money if it is not actually going into the house? Well, what you're going to be doing with that money is you're going to be investing it. Where are you going to be investing it? That's the key point. So if he invests it in a savings account and he gets about 4% out of it, then he's probably going to be better off buying the house. If he puts it into something a little bit higher returning, let's say 7.5% from our GBP income fund, he's still actually better off buying the house. Now, if you push it up to 9.5%, and now we're talking our USD income fund, for example, it's actually better for him to rent based purely on the numbers. Now, if we put it a little bit higher, we go to 18%, for example, private equity, then it is definitely better for him to be renting and invest the rest of the amount. And look, even if the numbers come out in the favor of renting for your situation, that doesn't mean renting is the right answer for you, because stability, putting down roots, having a place your kids can grow up in, not being subject to a landlord's decisions, these are all real and valid reasons to actually buy a house. The numbers should inform your decision, but they shouldn't make the decision for you. And if buying is the right decision for you, the next question, especially as a Muslim, is how do you actually go about doing it the halal way? Because that's where it gets complicated. So how do you actually buy in a halal way? Because there's a lot of noise around this. Competing fatwas, strong opinions, people on both sides talking with more certainty than the situation probably deserves. So let's try and cut through it clearly. The mainstream conventional mortgage is interest-based, riba. And the prohibition on riba in Islam is serious. This isn't a grey area in terms of the principle. Where the debate exists is around necessity or context or available alternatives. In the UK, we have a pretty decent array of options. The likes of Gatehouse, Stride Up, and now Offer Home Purchase Plans, which is regulated by the FCA and crucially has been signed off by Islamic scholars. In short, they operate on a diminishing musharaka model, a co-ownership structure where you purchase a house with a provider, pay rent on the part you don't own, and then gradually buy them out. It might feel like the same thing, but the form and how you get it is genuinely different. The risks, the rewards, the legal treatment, the regulation, the tax treatment, everything is different. We've done another video going into a lot more detail that you can watch later as well. There are also alternative providers like Fider and Way Home that are worth mentioning, and we've reviewed a bunch of them on this channel historically. We are pro all of these products, but the honest caveat is that they are more expensive than conventional mortgages right now in almost all cases. We're talking roughly 20% more in monthly payments in some cases, but this is just basic economics. These products are serving a much smaller percentage of the market, which means a higher cost of funding and a smaller client base. With scale, you can charge far less. But for niche products like these, the premium is a commercial reality that we have to face. The good news though is that this is changing, and that's something that we've personally been working on to reduce that amount extra on top. To do that, you need two things. You need more funding and you need more competition. And for the last few years, through the GBP Income Fund, we've actually been funding the likes of people like Stride Up and now Offer on their home purchase plans. More funding unlocks more capacity, but it also promotes more competition, which drives rates down. And we saw this firsthand when Offer recently launched their home finance products and immediately came in below the market rate. That's the trend we expect to continue. We should be honest, by the way, there will always be some premium. You're always going to be serving a minority of the population rather than the majority. So we can't necessarily ever expect to completely compete on the same terms as conventional mortgages, but our goal is to reduce that gap as much as possible. And if that's something you want to support, you can learn more about our GBP Income Fund. The link is in the description below. What if you can't afford an Islamic mortgage? The first thing we'd say is don't reach for a blanket fatwa from the internet. There are rulings that have been circulating for 20 years, written for a completely different context, that people are applying today to their own situation without really understanding what they were intended to cover. What you should do instead is speak to a local scholar who knows you, your income, your family situation, what's actually available to you in your area, and then apply a fatwa. Fatwas are meant to be personal. A scholar sitting with you, understanding your specific circumstances, is in a completely different position to give you guidance than a generalized ruling issued for a different time and a different place. And be honest with yourself in that conversation as well. There's a difference between a halal product being genuinely inaccessible to you and it simply being a bit more expensive than you'd like it to be. Those are different situations, and a scholar can help you work out which one you're actually in and what the right answer is from there. Look, if anything, this video should have shown you just how nuanced this really is, both from a numerical perspective, but also from a spiritual one. And that's kind of the point. This debate gets thrown around on social media and at dinner tables by people on both sides who are well-intentioned, but often without the full picture on this decision. And when it comes to the scholarly side of this, let's leave that to those who are qualified to discuss it. And let's make sure we're not overstating our position on either side. So maybe the most useful thing that you can do the next time this argument comes up, whether it's in the group chat or at the dinner table, is just send them this video. Let us do the talking for you. And if you want to work out what the numbers look like for your own situation, the link again is in the description below. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.